All right, the White House caught lying. The White House caught lying about a new clip showing Biden getting off of Air Force One. We have that for you. We better have that for you. All right, so I want to show you this clip. This came in overnight. And, if you look at this thing, it's shot by a professional person. So the whole idea of cheap, fake, cheap, that's not going to fly here because this is a real camera. This is not a cell phone. And you see Biden and his wife getting off. Wow. And watch how she walks and watch how he walks. Look at the intent with which she walks. Look at the intent of the people around Biden and how they walk. Look at the pace. Look at where their faces are. Now he's trying to get in. Now maybe they'll allege somehow that this was slowed down, but look at the other people in the shot. In fact, there's somebody who will come in. If you're listening on Apple iTunes, thank you for that. And make sure, if you're not listening on Apple iTunes, I love it, but maybe loop this again if you would, Drew, because that guy in the front is really interesting to see. But if you could go over to Apple iTunes and subscribe to the audio version of the podcast. If you're listening to the audio, we love that you're doing that. If you want to see this, you got to come over to YouTube where we are live every day. Anyway, you can see how everybody else is sort of more with it. And he's struggling, like the mouth kind of hanging open. And he doesn't look well. He just doesn't look well. Now, they're saying that this is somehow doctored. But I want you to see just at the very, very end of this clip, there's a gentleman that comes into the frame. You see that? And he's walking at a certain pace. It would be very hard, knowing what I know about video. I'm not saying it would be impossible, but it would be very hard to slow Biden down enough as he's getting into the SUV and keep the guy in the front of the frame working on sort of a normal speed. This, at my glance, does not look like it has been altered. But in this crazy wackadoo universe in which we are now living, KJP, Karine Jean-Pierre, this might be her biggest claim to fame ever. She's actually out there trying to say, oh, this is just a cheap fake. This isn't real. All of these things are not real. Come on, girl. Come on, lady. But anyway, hear her saying it. She said it first on Monday, and then she doubled down yesterday.
And I think you all have called this the cheap fakes video, and that's exactly what they are. They are cheap fakes video. They are done in bad faith, and some of your news organization have been very clear, have stressed that these the right wing critics of the president have a credibility problem because of the fact checkers have repeatedly caught them pushing misinformation, disinformation, and so we see this, and this is something coming from your part of the world, calling them cheap fakes and misinformation. And I'll quote the Washington Post, where they wrote about this, and they said how Republicans use misleading videos to attack Biden in a 24-hour period.
Well, you notice how she's reading her notes? So she's getting her talking points from up above, and then she's reading it out to these reporters. And clearly, the Washington Post already went with those talking points. So some of these videos that she's referencing that they're saying are cheap fakes are not entirely cheap fakes. In other words, maybe they cut out a part here and there. Like we have the parachute one. If you look at this one, he's over in France and he looks kind of lost. And it had been edited in such a way that he looked like he was just walking away from the crowd. In reality, he was actually trying to see what this parachuter was doing. So if you watch the whole thing, you eventually see him acknowledging that parachuter, and that's what he's most interested in. You see the Prime Minister of Italy trying to bring him back into the crowd for a photo op. But look at everybody's face. Look at everybody's face. Look at how everybody is moving. Look at how he's putting on his sunglasses versus the entire rest of the crowd. In other words, he's moving slow. So let me just tell you, KJP and Washington Post, by the way, that company's having a whole series of issues onto itself. There's like a mutiny going on with the reporters because they got a former Murdoch person there in an editorial position. We'll leave that alone. But look, I mean, they can say what they want. They can say this is a cheap fake. Americans, they're looking at this going, this guy is not well. So even if you don't show the part of the, he just looks like he's wandering off, the fact that he shuffles so slowly and moves so slowly, that's the problem. And it's kind of diabolical of you to suggest anything else. All right? You want to talk about gaslighting, which comes from some like 1950s, psychodrama about, it was a movie where the husband is gaslighting the wife. And I think he was actually like literally turning the gas. I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard about it. Turning the gas on the stove every single night. And so she thought and he's like, no, it's not really happening, but he was doing it. And so it was driving her crazy, like mentally insane. And they're trying to say, there's nothing to see here. The president's perfectly fine. That other day in Los Angeles with President Obama, perfectly fine. You know, it was just a familial bond. It was what you saw, KJP said, was not what you think you saw. Here he is. Again, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, terrific, but I'll just walk you through this video. So he's looking out at the crowd. You see Obama acknowledging the crowd. His head's going up and down. He's making facial expression. Whereas Mr. Dazed and Confused is just looking off to space. And so, yes, the former president escorts the current president off the stage. And you know what? It didn't look good. It just didn't look good. The Hollywood Reporter tweeted it out. One of their correspondents who was in the audience actually tweeted this video. He wrote, that's a wrap on record-setting Democrat fundraising for Joe Biden's election campaign, netting $28 million. What do you know? Former President Barack Obama and President Joe Biden offer final waves to Peacock Theater crowd as Obama then grabs Biden's hand to lead him off stage following a 40-minute conversation with Jimmy Kimmel. So he just said, kind of innocuously, that Biden grabbed Obama's hand and they walked off together. Well, there was hell to pay for that one. And the next thing you know, this poor reporter finds himself reporting on himself because the next headline he had to write was this. Over at Hollywood Reporter, take a look. White House slams claims President Biden froze at LA fundraiser following THR's viral clip. Press Secretary KJP said the video is not a reflection of Biden's mental state, but rather a tender moment between friends. That is what you saw. It's kind of psychotic. It's kind of. I mean, she's sitting there saying, you did not see what you think you saw. Well, one reporter in the press room kind of had it with her, and they went back and forth, followed by James Rosen, the guy that I was just talking about earlier. And he started asking some questions because, you know, by the way, he's seen this movie before. It was he who actually was spied upon by the Obama administration back when he was at Fox News during the Obama administration's tenure. So let's go to this clip.
And just a quick follow on the video you were talking about.
Yeah.
There were two instances in recent days where leaders, former President Obama and George Maloney, they physically put hands on the president to guide him and show him, give stage directions. Are they doing that on their own, or has anybody asked them to run the show like that?
First of all, let me spoke to the most recent, right? And as we saw on Saturday, President Obama's office put out a statement. So I would refer you to that statement about what was being accused in those by others. And he said this did not happen in the sense of what people were saying they were seeing, right? Or what was being falsely reported that they were seeing. Let's not forget, President Obama, President Biden have a relationship. They are friends. They're like family to each other. And I think that's what you saw. You saw the president put his hand on the back of President Biden, and they walked off the stage after taking questions or at an event taking questions from Jimmy Kimmel. That is what you saw. But I would refer you to President Obama's office statement. They talked about this, they discussed this, and they came out with it pretty quickly.
And Maloney,
all right.
You wanted to say something about
Maloney? I don't have anything. I don't know specifically what happened with Maloney.
the wandering, the parachutist.
Oh, I mean, look, that was, as I said, it was a cheap, a cheap fake. That was definitely a cheap fake. It was. This was widely fact-checked. That video was widely fact-checked, including by conservatives media, on what happened, what occurred. The president walked over to give a thumbs up to divers who had just landed right in front of him, and if you run that tape a little bit longer, you would see what was happening, what the president was actually doing, and it is a cheap fake.
So this is what about nothing, and he's totally normal.
What I'm saying is, this is a president, right? Let's step back for a second. Instead of And I said this moments ago, instead of Republicans, focusing on the president's performance in office and what he's been able to accomplish, his actual record, they do these cheap fakes. They're cheap fakes. And you're asking me about the Maloney, you're asking me what happened.
I'm going to jump in because then she just goes off on how great his record is. And it's like, wow. No, you know what? Republicans can take that line all day long, and they do. They go after his record on immigration. They go after his record on the economy. They go after his record on inflation. They go after his record on law and order and crime, okay? They go after his record on handouts. The fact that he's trying to defy the Supreme Court to give everybody a blank check for their education and to make you pay for it. I mean, they go after him on everything because, it's pretty easy. Like, there's a lot of riches to trove there. So they just also happen to go after him because you can't help but look at this and actually be worried about the guy. He was in France. This is something that she's going to call a cheap fake as well, because most of the clips that you saw in social media didn't actually show him sitting down. But I don't care whether he eventually sits or he doesn't sit. The guy looks dazed and confused, like he doesn't know what day it is. He's operating more slowly than the rest of the population. And this is not in slow-mo. Let's take a look. They cut to the flag at an opportune time. Okay, so they're getting ready. They're getting ready to sit. He's getting ready to sit. Nobody else is getting ready to sit. Everybody thinks he's having a rather delicate moment because everybody else, right? Everybody else is standing and he's like, and then eventually he goes down. So there, you just saw the full clip, unaltered clip, and they're still going to tell you that's a cheap fake? I just showed you the whole thing. All right, you tell me if that is a gentleman that is in his prime. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, finito. Okay, he managed to do it on the fourth try, and that's when everybody followed his lead and they sat down. But it's weird to watch. So this is great. There's this little meme that got tweeted out today. I love this because for some reason, now you can't report anything that's in fact and true. I mean, gosh, I hate that because, he fell. But just in case you're wondering what cheap fake is, this is a new noun. Any unedited video of Joe Biden's cognitive decline that the Biden administration does not want the public to see is a cheap fake. Wow. A new vocabulary word every single day. But what's so messed up is that once again, they're trying to say the problem is you, America. The problem is you. It's not us. I mean, we're great. Joe Biden, he's like a spring chicken who's bringing down inflation and locking up the border. Except he's not.